And joining us right now on the Roth and Orthopedics guest line from Jacob Media, from Sports Illustrated, from Philly Voice, pretty much anywhere you get your Eagles content, you're reading it from this man, John McMullen. John, how are you, brother?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Mark.
Absolutely. How are you recovering from Super Bowl week? Are you back yet? Are you bounced back? How you feeling?
I don't think you ever bounce back with this team because it never stops with this. Something about this team. I don't know. In the old days, they say you don't want to lose the back page. Nobody reads newspapers, but they don't want to lose the back page.
Understood. So one of the things I do have to ask you about, and by the way, if you're not following John, make sure you do so on all social media platforms, especially Twitter as well. John, I literally saw this as I was doing the show yesterday. We were running my interview with Paul Hudrick last night of Liberty Ballers, talking all things Sixers. And all of a sudden, and we're well aware of this now, the Eagles coordinator search, whether it be offensive or defensive, and this has to do with their now former defensive coordinator, Jonathan Gannon. My question in the moment, and still wondering, what is the chronology of this? Did Jonathan Gannon get a counteroffer from the Eagles ahead of his offer from the Cardinals, or was it after basically, how hard did the Eagles try to keep Jonathan Gannon here as their defensive coordinator?
I think pretty hard. I mean, if you go back to before the Super Bowl, they thought he was going to be back after Houston went with D'Amico Ryans, and you heard Howie. Howie said they're renting him since basically day one. He knew it wouldn't be long before somebody came calling. Nick's called him a stud as an assistant coach. So obviously there's a disconnect between some of the fan base and how the league values Jonathan Gannon. But I got to tell you, first you have to understand the timeline. Like, I was in Arizona for the Super Bowl, and on Saturday, I was told, pretty good chance he's going to be the head coach of the Cardinals. And then the story going around is before the game, Howie said, "Hey, did you know the Cardinals want to interview you on Sunday?" And Jonathan said, "No, by no means did I know," which, half the league knows he's getting a job. So I find it very hard to believe. So, part of the back and forth is tough to believe. But ultimately, when he got the job, did the Eagles, give him this offer where he's going to get paid more than a head coach, whatever that means, assumingly more than Arizona? Yeah, they wanted him back. And they tried to convince him to come back. But, it's a head coaching job. There's only 32 of them. Kyler Murray, that's the one thing JG said. Normally, when you take over a team in the NFL, you don't have a ready-made quarterback. Say what you want about Kyler Murray, but he's got a lot of talent if you can tap into it. So that's a pretty good gig from that standpoint for a first-time head coach. But yeah, the Eagles wanted him back, and it was tough. It was never. I mean, Jonathan wants to be a head coach, so it was always going to be tough to if he got an offer, he wasn't going to say no.
Gotcha. So just, do you know whether or not the offer from Howie Roseman that was more than a head coach, do you know if that came after Arizona's offer or before?
Well, that's why, I think they were trying to convince him to stay. That's why I bring up the timing of them saying, "Oh, Super Bowl game day. Hey, did you know Arizona?" That's not true. And that's not true because, again, half the league knew he was getting the job. So how could it possibly be true? Not that there's all these they couldn't interview him because Monty Ossenfort, who's the GM out there, is very close to Jonathan Gannon. So you have all these rules in the NFL. They missed their window to interview him the first time. So when he got the GM job, Super Bowl bye week, they couldn't interview him because that was only for second interviews. They didn't interview him the first time. So they were shut out till after the Super Bowl. But it was more of a situation where, all right, it was sort of Monty sort of rubber stamping things. And then you got to work out a deal with Bill Bidwell, which isn't the easiest thing in the world, I imagine. But everybody knew he was kind of getting the job. So it's a little, and the Eagle, if I knew it, the Eagles knew it, is what I'm trying to say. So they were working on trying to get him to stay, I would say, before
Gotcha.
the game.
Now, as you pointed out earlier, Howie Roseman said he was kind of renting Jonathan Gannon, and you also acknowledged the disconnect for the fan base. I'm certainly by no means asking you to sell the fan base that doesn't like Jonathan Gannon on Jonathan Gannon, but what is it that the league sees in Jonathan Gannon that says, oh, yeah, right away, this guy is going to be a head coach. He only needs, 2 years as a DC. He's going to be a head coach. What is it about him that the league likes so much?
I think a lot of it is leadership. I think, people get bogged down on scheme and stuff like that, Mark. And, there's a sort of cliche around the NFL. If you're hiring a scheme, you're doing it wrong. In other words, there's bigger things. And you see it with Nick Sirianni. I mean, leadership, ability to get people on the same page, connection, he talks about all the time. These are all big things. So every single one of these people that don't like Jonathan Gannon, it's like Mark Barzetti. You walk in a room, 5 minutes later, you like the guy. I mean, you've met people like that. I guarantee. You walk in a room, you like the guy. People connect with him. People want to be around him. People want to follow him. So you see that kind of leadership, which is rare, and people say, pew, 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 when he does that thing. I don't know if you saw, he's kind of a weirdo at times, but he's likable. He's a likable weirdo.
Gotcha.
And people tend to follow him.
The whole not traffic accident, but incident where he just said, we're going to gut these guys, basically. I was like, man, just when we were starting to like Jonathan Gannon. Well, The people that didn't like Jonathan Gannon were starting to like Jonathan Gannon, I guess. So where do we go from here, John? There's some names that are out there right now. I saw that you retweeted this as well from Jeremy Fowler, saying that the Eagles just made just interviewed former Wisconsin defense coordinator Jim Leonhard, who played in the league for 10 years off and on. Mostly his best season was with the Jets, where he was playing under Rex Ryan, also played under Rex Ryan, I believe, with Baltimore. What do you know about Leonhard?
He's more aggressive, so that'll probably, Eagles fans might like him from that standpoint. He is a Rex Ryan guy, so he generally sort of builds as you would think a Rex Ryan defense would look like. I'm not sure. Look, Vance Joseph as well. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me because you built this team for the Fangio-like defense, which Gannon ran, Hassan Reddick, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who you're going to bring back. Do you really want to put those guys in a scheme that's not suited for them? So, I think the Eagles are casting a wide net, but, that tells me Jonathan Gannon, trying to keep Jonathan Gannon tells me, all right, they don't want to move off that, right? Mm-hmm. So, if they're willing to pay him $3 million a year to be a coordinator or something of that nature, why do they want to shift schemes so quickly? Now, guy like Vance Joseph, just because he's played a certain way doesn't mean he can't change. Jim Leonhard, just because he played a certain way doesn't mean he can't change. That's part of being a deep. I remember when Gannon got this job, I said, okay, we're going to see some Mike Zimmer stuff. We're going to see some A-gap stuff. Didn't do that. We're going to see some Matt Eberflus cover 2 stuff. Didn't do that. All of a sudden he comes in, he's like, no, I want to play this. So maybe those guys say that.
Okay. Interesting to see. There's one name that's I've seen out there a couple of different times, and that's Lovie Smith. Was talking to Quentin Michael last week, talking to Hollis Thomas last week as well about whether or not they'd like Lovie Smith to come in here, the experienced defensive coordinator, obviously a guy that would come in here with plenty of head coaching experience and also experience as a defensive coordinator. He's a guy that if you're an offensive head coach, you don't got to worry about the defense because Lovie will have it. What do you think there's any connection there, any plausible idea of Lovie Smith coming to Philadelphia?
I would be. People love big names, don't they?
They really do. I know.
They want to play cover 2. They want to play cover 2. This city who hates Jonathan Gannon with 70 sacks wants to play cover 2. I don't know. Does that make sense?
It does not make sense to me. It does not make sense to me, John. I don't know what would make sense after. And look, I know we received a lot of flack for it, but the whole thing of like, I don't have a scheme, but I have a philosophy. I like that you have a philosophy. I think one of the greatest compliments we give every great head coach or good head coach or defensive coordinator is you coach to what you have. I think that's what great coaches or coordinators do. And I think Gannon, especially in his first year, did that. Do I think he could have ramped it up a little bit? Yes, 70 sacks is great, but schematically, when you weren't being able to get it done in the second half of the Super Bowl, maybe a little bit more pressure would have benefited the defense that wasn't able to come up with the big play, whether it was the field, whether it was scheme, whether it was a mix of both, I don't know. But I feel like the in-game adjustment is something the next guy has to do with great regularity to show fans that he is going to make that adjustment in the crucial moment.
Yeah, well, I have a problem with the adjustment theory. One, I think a lot of people throw that out as sort of a buzzword, and there's no real, like, what adjustments did you want him to make? And I'm not talking to you. I think right. Throw out that word and say, all right, first of all, my criticism of Jonathan Gannon is there was too much adjustment in the fact that from the standpoint of the Eagles don't blitz, right?
Right.
They blitz, I think, was the third most all season in the Super Bowl. They don't play press coverage. They played 63% man coverage, by far the most they played all season. In other words, they went against what they do well. So I think most people are talking about in-game adjustments. So if you want to talk about in-game adjustments, and everyone likes to talk about halftime, which is a bunch of crap, Mark. I mean, Jim Schwartz will tell you, now, I'm glad Peyton Manning went out and said, there's no time at halftime. There's a little bit more on the Super Bowl, but he's like, you can, get a couple orange slices, take a pee, and go out and play. That's what we do. That's what Peyton Manning said. A little bit more time in the Super Bowl. But Jim always said, you adjust from, the first series on, constant adjustments. So from that standpoint, but even if you want to default to that old trope of halftime adjustments, what the hell are you adjusting? You dominated the first half.
Right.
The first half wasn't the stinking problem. You don't go in, dominate a team. I thought, I'll be honest, I thought the game was over. I said, well, this team can't play with the Eagles. Why the hell am I adjusting from what I just saw? It makes no sense to me. Now, in the second half, rip the defense all you want. Rip Jonathan Gannon all you want. That's ugly. That you got to do something to stop that. But, the only difference between Super Bowl 52 and Super Bowl 57, remember, the Eagles gave up 500 passing yards to Tom Brady, but they made a play. They made one play defensively. If they make one play defensively against Kansas City, they win again. That's the only difference.
I agree. No, that in particular, I agree, because I was waiting for that moment, especially in the second half, especially their first 3 possessions. I know they did more than this, but about the 3 possession mark when they scored their third consecutive, got their third consecutive score. I'm like, okay, it's coming. There's somebody's Hassan Reddick's going to show up in the backfield and knock a ball loose, or James Bradbury or Darius Slay are going to step up. They're going to jump a route. CD Deuce is going to do something, and it never happened. Now, to get back to the going forward part of this, do you think they stay in-house? Do you think they stay in-house for like Rocker, for instance? Do you think
Denard Wilson? Yeah. I think there's still a good chance. I think Sean Desai would be the one outside name that makes sense. He's a Fangio guy. But always, if Jim Leonard blows him out of the water, if Vance Joseph blows him out of the water, Nick might say, oh, I like this guy. I really like this guy. And all of a sudden you start over.
Gotcha.
But, I think people need to temper their expectations, because even if Gannon was back, they're not getting 71 sacks next year. they're probably not going to be the number 2 defense in the NFL. So I think people need to temper their expectations.
All right. Offensively speaking, offensive coordinator, is it a shoo-in? Brian Johnson gets the gig?
Shoo-in. Absolute shoo-in.
All right. Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay.
From that standpoint, yeah. I mean, Jalen loves him. You're going to be paying Jalen $50 million a year. We're now to the phase of you want to make Jalen happy, and that'll make Jalen happy.
And then lastly, CD Deuce, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. I've really enjoyed. Well, I mean, 6 interceptions certainly helps, but he's just a fun guy to watch on the field. And when you talk about making plays in the second half, he made a big play where Pacheco was just going nuts, or Pacheco was going nuts down the left side of the field. He just came down and made a stop. How do you think the Eagles do handle him? I saw the report out there from our friends at Inside the Birds, most likely a franchise tag. How do you think it goes down to get CD Deuce back here in Philadelphia?
Well, the Eagles want him back. I mean, that's, they don't trade for a guy on, coming off his rookie contract. That's who the Eagles want to pay. Mm-hmm. So when you start talking about valuation and who they want to pay, it gets a little bit murkier when you get to age 30. You're on the 3rd contract. What they want to play is young, ascending players coming off their first contract. That's exactly where CJ is. I will say they want him back. I will say the Eagles do not like to use the franchise tag. Do not like to use it. So they'll work for obviously a long-term deal. Howie, Jake Rosenberg with avoidable years. You saw 4 players void today. That's their sort of contract trick. They want to sign him long-term. Would they use it? Maybe, but they don't like to use the franchise tag. So,
gotcha.
But they want CJ Gardner-Johnson. That's the core of it. There's no question, because that's the exact player they want to pay. The guy 25, 26 coming off that rookie contract.
Mm-hmm. Then the opposite end of that age spectrum is a guy named Brandon Graham. Has Brandon Graham played his last snap as an Eagle?
I don't think so, because, if there's one guy who is going to give the Eagles the team-friendly deal, like everybody talks about Jalen Hurts, team-friendly, maybe he'll give the Eagles a break. No, he won't. He's going on his 2nd contract. This is his time to make money. He's never made big money. He's made big money for me and you, but not big money in the NFL. He wants that big contract. There's no team-friendly 2nd contracts. Brandon, he knows where he is in his career. He doesn't want to leave Philadelphia. He doesn't want to be one of those guys playing in Detroit, limping around in his last season in a weird-looking uniform for him. So I think he'll come back on a 1-year deal. He knows his role now, 15 to 20 plays. He was extremely effective at it. And I think it'll be relatively cheap, and both sides will get it done.
Good enough for me. His name is John McMullen, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure you guys check him out. All digital platforms. Also, give him a read, of course, on Sports Illustrated, SI.com, Philly Voice as well, Jacob Media, Birds 365 that he does with our friend Jody McDonald. I got to get Jody on the show. I want to reach out to him, see his schedule, to talk a little baseball with Mr. Jody McDonald.
Jody's a big baseball guy.
He absolutely is. John McMullen, great catching up with you, man. Thanks so much. And it was an absolute joy to be able to have you for the hits and pre and post at the Jacob Media, of course, with their YouTube channel and 6abc.com throughout the season, John. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Mark.
Absolutely. Great. John McMullen checking on the Rothman Orthopedics guest line.